Jewish groups in the United States are raising flags about the use by Republican gubernatorial candidate for Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, of a far-right social media platform called GAB that is home to some blatantly racist and anti-Semitic content, as well as Mastriano using as a campaign consultant GAB CEO Andrew Torba, who lumps Jews together with pagans and atheists as groups with too much political power. Well, Mastriano's Democratic opponent in that race, perhaps not coincidentally, is Pennsylvania's American Jewish attorney, Joshua Shapiro. Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. And Mike, one thing about the story, it made me aware of this social media platform called GAB, which I never heard of. I looked on and has some really vile stuff on it, and does not seem the kind of place a gubernatorial candidate should be spending his ad dollars.
Mastriano builds himself as a Christian nationalist. He's paid $5,000 toward the GAB for consulting, but reporting saying that $5,000 fee essentially went toward building followers from the GAB website of Mastriano. And this is particularly concerning, as you mentioned, because GAB not only mentioned as a, kind of a free and open platform, which in some ways is good, but it's become the home of essentially anti-Semitic content, far-right white supremacist content, and GAB, the home also as well as the Tree of Life synagogue assailant who used GAB's platform for white supremacist content and to disseminate messaging on the very morning in which he perpetrated the attack on the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh several years ago. Basically, not good news for the Jews. Meanwhile, GAB CEO Andrew Torba, who you mentioned at the top of the segment, he has disseminated his own white supremacist and anti-Semitic content on his own platform, GAB, and elsewhere. And he came out just a few days ago saying that the conservative movement should not include Jews or really include anybody except those that follow Jesus Christ. And he said that in specific regard to Ben Shapiro, a Jewish commentator who's a kind of a cornerstone of the conservative movement in the United States. And again, this all comes in the context, as you mentioned, of Mastriano's opponent in the Pennsylvania race there, which is Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General, and Shapiro, a Jew, and he makes no bones about it. Now, what's really interesting now, because it's become obviously a political concern, the head of the Republican Jewish coalition, who would normally back Mastriano, I would imagine, the Republican candidate for governor, Matthew Brooks, who is a Pennsylvanian himself, has come out and said it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat, Republican, you've got to call out anti-Semitism wherever it comes from, and he has demanded that Mastriano basically disavow himself of any connection to GAB. Calev, credit where credit is due. This is one of the few times in politics where a Democrat or Republican has said, you know what, someone in my party is using white supremacists and anti-Semitism as a political ally, and it's got to be condemned, and condemned right now. Credit to Matt Brooks from RJC.
And what about other Republicans or other politicians there speaking out against Mastriano? Does he have much support among, let's say, the GOP mainstream?
Not amongst the mainstream per se, and it's, interesting. Just a few hours ago, Pat Toomey, one of the Republican senators, was asked for his endorsement of Dr. Oz, one of the celebrities running for Senate in Pennsylvania. He said he'll throw his endorsement behind Oz, but when he was asked about Mastriano, he refused to comment on it. It's kind of showing, and it's kind of a microcosm of what's going on right now in the GOP in relation to Mastriano. Everybody willing to throw their support even behind somewhat controversial candidates like Oz, but Mastriano appears to be outside the realm right now in terms of mainstream GOP support. And there's a lot of concern right now within the Republican Party with candidates like Mastriano who appear to be unelectable in a general election, and it could really come back to haunt the Republican Party come November 8th and the general election.
Right, and it's certainly unusual. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think of it. Pennsylvania also putting up a gubernatorial candidate, one of the two major parties doing it. And it's this growing situation that is kind of paralleling on the Democratic side the rise of more extremist candidates on both ends. And again, anyone who has looked at that GAB social platform understands why the seriousness of candidates spending advertising dollars for that particular medium. Mike Wagenheim there in New York, thank you for that.